I realize that even those who are following the logic of my argument, even those predisposed to believe in the existence of a provident God, still balk at the problem of evil. If God exists, how could there be so much evil in the world? The 19th century British philosopher John Stuart Mill formulated the objection this way. If God is, as classical Christian theology says, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, there should be no evil. If he's omniscient, he'd know about it. If he's omnipotent, he could do something about it. If he's omnibenevolent, he'd want to do something about it. Therefore, if there's evil, such a God cannot exist. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas formulated the objection even more pithily. Thomas said, if one of two contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But God is called the infinite good. Therefore, if God exists, there should be no evil. But there is evil. Therefore, there's no God. Powerful arguments, those. And I don't know any place on the face of the earth where the force of them is felt more than here at the Auschwitz concentration camp. If an all-good, all-knowing, provident Creator God exists, how do you begin to explain what happened here? This is the hardest, most vexing and puzzling theological question of all. Any answer we give will necessarily be inadequate, but at least we can perhaps gesture in the direction of an answer. The first observation to make is this: evil in the strict sense does not exist, for it's always a deprivation, a lack of what ought to be there, like a cavity in a tooth or a cancer compromising an organ. Therefore, we should never speak of God as creating evil, and we should never think of evil as a positive force opposing God. But this just postpones the question a bit. Why does God permit evil in His creation? The classical answer, articulated by Augustine, Aquinas, and a whole army of their followers, is that God permits evil so as to bring about a greater good. We all have experience of this from time to time. Some great calamity, an illness, a failure, the loss of a loved one, results over time in some good that would never have come about in another way. We sometimes sense that growth comes through pain. But in the presence of truly profound evil, the kind that we sense here, doesn't that explanation seem a tad facile? Well, the Bible understands this. Look at the book of Job. In one fell swoop, Job loses everything and everyone dear to him. He loses wealth and livelihood, family, health. For 7 days, he sits in sullen mourning on an ash heap. He's joined by 3 friends who sit silently with him. But finally the friends speak, and they articulate what most of us would take to be a pretty commonsensical argument. Job, you must have done something to offend God. Somehow, Job, this terrible suffering of yours must be the result of your sin. But Job knows he's righteous, and so he protests. Eventually he dismisses the 3 friends, and then, in one of the most dramatic scenes in the Bible, he calls God into the dock, challenging God to explain why He's allowed him to suffer this way. Here Job speaks for anyone who's gone through undeserved suffering. Chapter 38 features God's response. Then the Lord addressed Job out of a storm and said, "Who is this that obscures divine plans with words of ignorance? Gird up your loins now like a man. I will question you, and you will give me the answers. Where were you when I founded the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its size? Do you know? Have you ever in your lifetime commanded the morning, or shown the dawn its place? Have you entered into the sources of the sea and walked about in the depth of the abyss? God goes on, taking Job on a great tour of the cosmos, acquainting him with its infinite mysteriousness, with all of its puzzles and anomalies. The implication is that God is an artist, and that his canvas is all of space and all of time. God is producing a work of extraordinary complexity, the darks and lights coming together to form patterns that we, in principle, couldn't even begin to see. Behind me is Georges Seurat's great pointillist masterpiece, Sunday Afternoon on Le Grand Jatte. They say that when Seurat painted this picture, he sat on a high stool and carefully applied the colors point by point with long brushes. If you look at this picture with your nose pressed against it, all you'll see are a few blotches. But if you step back, you begin to see how the points have formed themselves into patterns. Then, as you step back even further, how those patterns have arranged themselves into figures and groups. When you stand now at the back of the room, you take in the entire picture, you see how all of those points of color, all the light and darkness, have arranged themselves into a composition of stunning harmony and order. God is an artist. But what do we see of God's creation as we look at our little swath of space and time? Just a few blotches, perhaps a hint of pattern. It's only when we survey creation from the vantage point of God himself can we see how all of the points of nature and history, all the darks and lights, have arranged themselves into the great pattern. I might propose another analogy along these lines. The American philosopher William James told the story about his library and his dog. James said that his dog would come into his master's study at the end of the day. He'd look around and see everything. The books on the shelves, the papers on the desk, the globe in the corner. It occurred to James that though the dog saw everything, he understood almost none of it. And if his master had tried to explain it to him, those books are collections of pages on which are symbols of words that in turn signify ideas. That globe, that's a symbolic representation of the planet that we both live on that's hurtling through space. Well, the dog would have looked at him with perfect incomprehension. It then occurred to William James, so are we, vis-a-vis that great intelligence that orders and governs the universe. Though we see everything, we understand very little of it. And given the limited capacity of our minds, God could not even in principle begin to explain it to us. Still unsatisfied? Good. Though all these images, perspectives, and insights are illuminating, none finally solves the problem of reconciling a loving God and a universe marked by great cruelty. For the Christian faith, the only adequate resolution of this dilemma is the one effected by God himself on the cross of Jesus Christ. On that cross, the darkness of the human condition met the fullness of the divine love and found itself transfigured into life. On that cross, God went to the limits of God-forsakenness and made even death itself a place of hope.